I really do owe him my sobriety. I mean, he was there that night. He brought me in, and my whole first year of not drinking, which was very difficult, I had the really good fortune of having him as a good friend and sobriety partner.
Action.
Hello.
Hey, Hank.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
So we just had our phones out, and while I do, I want to show you something nuts. Let's see if you recognize where this is.
No, I don't.
Your birthday party.
Oh, that's City Winery.
Yes.
Okay, so wait, you were there?
I was at your party.
Oh my God, is that Corin?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it was like a friend of a friend, and I was already half dressed like Run DMC that day anyway. So when a friend
that was
said, come to this
perfect.
party where you can dress like your favorite band, I was already halfway there.
That's great. Wow.
So-
Did I meet you that night?
No.
I didn't even see half my friends.
I'm
because
sure.
it was just an excuse to play music by surprise for everyone. I didn't even really mean it to be a party.
It was awesome. So what we're discussing is Hank had a birthday party. It was 50?
60.
60.
Yeah.
In April at City Winery.
Yes.
And a friend invited me. And here's why it's important. You got on stage and started talking about your sobriety.
Yeah.
I was, holy shit, I couldn't believe that like people were allowed to do that. That was a mind blower. And the very next day, the idea for this podcast was born.
Is that right?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, based on seeing you so freely discuss and own your sobriety. So I really owe you such a debt of gratitude.
Wow, that's kind of amazing. So you sort of owe me some money, first of all.
And I'm raking
one.
it in right now, Hank. I mean, as you can tell. Yeah.
That's really great. I'm glad I inspired you to do that. I really am, because that's part of the point. I waited for years whether I should do that, talk in public, either at even a public private gathering like that or through a mic like this or wherever. And there are good reasons not to do it. The headline good reasons are a lot of people have done that in the past, famous people. And then 2 weeks later, they're out again. You don't want to blow your ego up over that, ironically, and then find yourself wasted out of your mind one day. Because that's how this will work for folks like us eventually. Maybe not in a second.
It
right?
happens.
It can happen. So those are all very good reasons. So I try to avoid using the specifics, but I do promote recovery. And, without much research, you can find what are the most likely methods of recovery that have the best success rates. But really, there's more and more. So there's no one way to do it. It's just an earnest desire to get sober and to not use. And I can say this, it has to be done, I believe, or it's best done in some form of a group setting. You can't do it all by yourself. You can't read a book and do it yourself and sit in your garage one day and go, I think I tinkered this into being. It has to be shared with at least one other human being, if not more.
I heard a great line this morning, in fact, something like, I recover out loud so others don't have to die in silence.
That's a very nice one. I haven't heard that one before. But yeah, it has to be shared. And so when I can remember, I make sure not to shout out the specific organization because of these reasons we just said. But truth be told, I'd rather, if the choice were, well, you can only, if you're going to speak in public, you have to mention it, or you can't speak in public, then I would mention it.
Right.
Because I think that the good done by letting people know there's no shame in it, that you have to reach out and get help. There's no shame in asking for help. There's no shame in getting for help. There's no shame in having those problems. There's no shame in having shame over having those problems. Is much more important, especially in this world we live in where we can talk into a mic and there's podcasts and all kinds of things and social media where that can just go everywhere. I think the times have changed so much that it's to me, just the good of it outweighs the potential downside.
I am with you 1,000%. I was born an addict. How about you? Were you born with it? Did it meet you later down the road? What do you think made you an addict?
I firmly believe from my experience that so my home program really right now is adult children of dysfunctional families. They call it adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families. It's kind of a misnomer because it's really any dysfunction that interrupts positive parental nurturing, family harmony and unity, and essentially loving parenting. Anything that interrupts that qualifies. It could be alcohol or drug abuse, could be depression, could be hypochondria, could be somebody dying early, could be somebody going to prison, could be somebody committing suicide in the family, or whatever trauma or interruptive event or series of events, or chronic, how you were raised. So I believe essentially that alcoholics are made, not born. I think you can have a genetic disposition to act out that way, but the truth is there are all kinds of ways, and I discovered many of them, to try to numb and try to survive your difficult childhood. Besides drugs and alcohol, I was a food addict too. I was anorexic and bulimic by the time I was a teenager. I was a tremendous workaholic in my adult life. And now that's a very societally accepted one, like, oh, workaholism. No, actually, our society will condone that more than being wasted in an alley, but it's no joke. I really suffered from that. Codependency, getting obsessed with other people's drug and alcohol problems or whatever they have going on. That's really kind of that's what I'm, that's my main way of acting out, is I will give me your problems, let me get fascinated with you, and I will really get obsessed and believe. We call it para-alcoholism or Al-Anonism. You take on the characteristics of the disease without ever picking up.
That's wild.
Have you not heard of that?
No.
Oh yeah, I mean that was the first program I entered, was Al-Anon, for the families and friends and loved ones of alcoholics. I was raised around a lot of it, and at the time my wife and I, she was not an alcoholic or an addict, but we were both raised in families with a lot of that, so we were both what we would call Al-Anonics. We were very, very codependent and unrecovered in that way. I was just very obsessive, very anxious, and I didn't drink much at the time because I'm a strange addict in that when in a love relationship, that was sort of my drug, so I would just kind of obsess on the other person, which I did over and over again. And the second those relationships would end, whether I ended them, the other person did, or it was mutual, I would hit drinking and drugs really hard as a single person till I found the next person to obsess over. That was my drug. That went on for years until I kind of got onto myself.
How did you get over that one? I mean, being a love addict is intense because you must have love in your life. Like that, you must have it, and you must regulate it, I guess, if it's really taking over. Whereas with alcohol, you can put it down, you can stop, you cannot.
Not so easy, but it's a simple goal. Let's
Right.
put it that way.
Clear
It's very
cut.
black and white.
Right, love is in there and in all your pores and in all your interactions. How did you peel yourself out of that cycle?
It was a series of paying attention to it over the years. Well, I mean, heartache is the main teacher, right? You have these relationships that end, and they're very painful. You know, I would go into a therapist's office or talk to an Al-Anon buddy, somebody in recovery, and I'd whine about, I'd complain about, wow, listen to like my romantic history, these 5 relationships. And it pretty much was a victim tale, you know, like she did this and she did that and that went wrong and this was awful and can you believe she did this and that was terrible and she cheated on me and that one lied to me and this blah, 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 blah. And finally my Al-Anon sponsor went, no, those are sad stories. Have you noticed there's one constant in all those variables? Like, what's the one thing about all those things that all the stories have in common? Yeah, the answer was me. So if nothing else, in Al-Anon recovery, I had to look at, well, why am I choosing that relationship over and over again, or some variation on it? Because if nothing else, there were other things that were my part too, but that was my part. And it turns out, you know, very not surprisingly, in a pretty pedestrian way, let's put it this way, in my 20s I was engaged to my mother, and then that ended, and sort of healed up out of that, and then in my 30s I married my dad, and worked through that stuff.
Made it easy to get monograms on your towels for
Yes,
wedding.
you
Yes,
know.
you already had this. Yeah. So how did you move from love addiction, Al-Anon, it's the other person, to I might be an alcoholic?
It's interesting. So I go into that Al-Anon program when my marriage ended, for the reasons I just
To your mom
mentioned.
or your dad?
I was married to someone who was very much, I responded to like my dad.
Got it.
I don't mean to be glib about this, but for all intents and purposes, that was the relationship I was replaying and playing out. And I was very, very sad, and I really was grieving for about a year. And in the program, we call it productive tears. Like, you try to look at why, and maybe I'm not going to do this again. I felt like I can't go through this again. That was about the 5th time I'd gone through that kind of heartache. I was 36, 37, and I was like, I don't think I can survive another one of these. So for me, what was very healthy in recovery was, well, what do I like? Instead of chasing somebody around, whether it's a woman I'm in love with, or a boss, or a job, or a thing that is demanding of me and I must do what it wants, because the Hollywood version of workaholism is wild. You know, it'll want you to do this for a whole year, 14 hours a day, and don't do anything else. It's like, well, what do I like? What do I want? What matters to me? Which was healthy. One of the things I discovered I liked doing was drinking. And at first, it kind of was healthy because it was a representation of me just enjoying myself and not doing anything for anybody else. But, you know, the way it was described to me when I went into the first night I got sober, shall I say, with the help of Matthew Perry and his sponsor.
I'm so sorry.
That's all right. He was a lovely guy, and he helped a lot of people, and we were good friends, and he struggled with this for a long time. Was, you know, the way the disease tends to run is fun with problems, just problems is how it goes, is how it tends to go. So I was sort of at fun with problems, and because I had so much Al-Anon recovery and observed so much of where this is all going to lead, I was able to be fairly high-bottomed, as we call it, and kind of pull myself out. Say, well, do I want to wait a year until I've got a DUI and I've got thrown in jail and I had a bar fight and I've publicly disgraced myself and I get fired from a job because I said something stupid, or do I want to just stop this right now? And I was already in a version of recovery, so I knew where to go, and I knew it could work. So I did that, and that's it was about 7 years into that Al-Anon recovery, that codependency recovery, that I discovered I had my own problem.
Was that a holy shit moment? Because you'd spent so much time thinking about the other people's problems which had affected you in your life?
Yeah, but it was like a car wreck in slow motion. I mean, I was onto it for years, and then I did the whole thing of, well, you know, the bargaining. Well, I'll drink, but I'm not going to get drunk. Well, I'll just drink on weekends. Well, I'll have two. Two's my limit. Well, I'll take this month off. And then I did all that, and then finally I found myself in Las Vegas, and I'd made the rule that I just can't get roaring drunk anymore. And there I was, you know, rip-roaring it up. And it was a Friday night, and I was having a real good time. And some part of me went, enjoy this one, buddy, because Monday it ends. And that's what happened. I went, you know, I started earnestly in sobriety that following Monday.
Do you remember clearly that Monday?
Yeah, sure. Very hard. Yeah.
First day of the rest of your life, for real?
Yes. I mean, I wrote about this in op-ed for the Times about Matthew Perry. Matthew brought me to that first meeting in L.A., and it's a huge meeting. We're not going to mention the organization, but a lot of people gathered to try to help you get sober.
Lions Club.
And there must have been about 200 people in there. It was like a big auditorium, speaker meeting. Two speakers spoke for like 20 minutes each. There were some other famous faces in there, and I stood there looking at the room. Matthew and I were very, very close friends. We met when he was 17, I was 22. We did our first couple of jobs together in LA. We were the first friends we really made with each other in LA back in 86, 87. And so we knew each other well. And I didn't say anything, but he knew the look on my face was beyond daunted. It was into demoralized, I think would be a fair way to express it, because of what you just said. Like, really? Like, somehow being in here is going to help me, stop drinking? And this just seems ridiculous to me, and sad and frustrating.
These
and
rooms
horrible.
are for the other people.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he looked at me and went, "It's something, isn't it? God's a bunch of drunks together in a room." And I had no idea what he meant at the time, and I kind of wrote the op-ed about what I discovered that he did mean. But yeah, I knew enough to know that I had to go one day at a time and just focus on, I'm just not going to drink today. I'm not going to worry about the rest of my life. And that was plenty.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was an hour at a time. Sometimes it was 15 minutes at a time. But as hard as that was, and it was not as hard as my Al-Anonic bottom, the 7 years earlier one, the sort of recovering from that codependent attachment thing. That was more painful for me.
Have you since, in real life, been able to reconcile your relationships with the folks that sent you into the rooms of Al-Anon?
Oh, yeah. Yes. Yeah, that's part of recovery, is you want to get past that resentment, victim, poor me phase, and look at your own part, see clearly what they did. I ended up in that adult children program tracing it back to how was I playing out my family of origin dramas, and which, you do, because the only way to heal it, we say you got to feel it to heal it, or they call it trauma mastery, whatever you want to term.
You're hitting me with all sorts of new concepts this morning. I haven't heard any of these.
You seek out the relationship that originally traumatized you. That's why we end up kind of being with the same person over and over again until we get onto it, so that you can actually feel the loss of, like, when you were 7 and it actually really hit you, but you deferred that pain because what 7-year-old could possibly take that? And then you feel it, and then you go, oh, okay. I actually really kind of lost. I didn't really have the connection with my mom and dad that I wanted, that I wished for, and accepting the details of that and how it affected me. And it's very upsetting. You grieve it, angry, sad, upset, hurt. And then you can heal it and forgive them and yourself and everybody involved.
Do your folks know they were forgiven?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I was fortunate enough to, while they were still alive, have done a lot of this work and have a pretty good relationship with them by the end. It wasn't the relationship that I always wanted or thought it should be, but part of it was letting that go and realizing it's not that, but it is what it is. And they did their best. And some of it wasn't so good, but some of what I do with my son isn't so good either.
Perfect segue. How has being sober affected your parenting?
It's been everything. I mean, this whole looking at my own part first, okay, which is what really eventually this recovery work is leading to. Like, one of the things we say is if you want to find out why you drank, stop drinking. Okay, so all the feelings that come up and the stuff and all that.
Oh, it's the worst part, frankly.
It's really hard.
Feelings. I hate it.
Yeah,
myself.
feeling the feelings. And, yeah. My wife and I were both in recovery.
I know, because you said it on stage at your birthday party.
Yes. And we both look at it this way, that we both acknowledge that it wasn't really modeled for us how to do this right, the parenting thing. So we needed to learn. And we did. We went to seminars, and we read, and we talked to experts, and we talked to other people. I even made a little mini web series documentary about it called Fatherhood that you can check out. You can Google it, Hank Azaria Fatherhood, you'll see it.
I shall.
And one of the main messages that came through was similar to recovery, was if you want your child to change, you want to change something about your kid, if you're not happy with how they're going, however you categorize that, the parent has to change their behavior first. There's nothing else going on except what you're feeding in there, whatever boundaries you are or aren't making and how you're doing it. And that's sort of how we have lived with it. If we want to change a way we see something's coming out in the wash with our son, we probably have to look, at least partly, to how we're setting that up and how we're contributing. We call it emotionally sober.
Yeah.
So that's the goal.
Okay. And how is your emotional sobriety?
It needs, similar to my alcohol or drug sobriety, it needs a one day at a time commitment. You know, I need to check in. I need to tell people. We say, like, don't vent at the person you're venting about. I get upset probably 4 or 5 times a day. Upset enough that when I was 33, I would have drank and not even realized that was why I was drinking today. Now I need to go to somebody I trust, whether it's a fellow traveler or somebody, whoever it is, my sponsee, anyone who will listen. Say, I am so angry and upset about this. And instead of yelling at the person, I'm going to yell at you about it. And then I'm going to calm down and see how I can respond and not react, and like that.
I got to get some of that because I'm a yeller.
Come anytime. I'll give you the information.
Please do, because where I am right now is needing that kind of emotional sobriety around my kids. And it's not new. I've been doing...
How old are your kids? I just met one.
Well, there's one. He's 12, and my older one is 15.
My son's 15, okay.
Okay, so... There's a lot of big emotions, and I react bigly to them.
Yeah.
And I'm so sick of myself. I mean, I remember doing No Scream 15, No Scream 16, so many years ago, trying to get myself under control, right? And the more sobriety I have from alcohol, and the more spiritual work I do and all the things, I do think I'm getting better at it. But as recently as last night, I'm ashamed. I cringe when I think of myself. Not to mention, by the way, cringing from the drinking years. When you look back at your drinking years, do you cringe? Do you have grace for yourself? How do you make friends with your past?
Well, I will answer that. But first of all, it was really in that codependency recovery, that first round I had, that I really had to address my anger front and center. I was much more of an overtly angry and reactive codependent than I was drunk. I was kind of a jolly drunk.
Oh, you're so lucky.
I was, but some of that was because I had worked out those anger issues as part of that codependency program, because that was my front and center problem. I was I would lose my temper. I was hot-tempered. I was upset about things, and I would express them loud. And
Me too.
yeah, and I really had to get how that was my part in things, and it was really difficult. Especially in my marriage, I had to learn to separate that the things I was upset about were fair enough. The way I was expressing them was not fair enough. And,
I know.
Yes, gasoline on fire.
Yes.
And you become as right as you are about the thing you're upset about. You become wrong in the moment where you shout that.
Just like
into
that.
Somebody's face
Yeah.
or elsewhere. Yeah, so I really had to recover from that. Like, it was a recovery issue for me. I've talked about this other places. It took a lot. It was like months of kind of effort in making, as much as an alcoholic will say, I can't drink, I had to say, I can't lose my temper at people. That's like a drug I can't, because it is kind of a drug. It is,
Yes.
Anger and fear are a chemical reaction in the body that is an altered state. It's kind of unpleasant, but for us addicts, it'll do in a pinch.
What is it? That anger is the champagne of emotions?
Yes.
I love that, because it is so true.
And often it goes deep because we feel like we're afraid to express what really upsets us. And in the same way that when you're drunk, you get liquid courage, when you're angry enough, you'll say, God damn it, blah, blah, blah. And it's the truth, and it is what you're upset about. But what I had to really learn to do with the help of a lot of people is not just stuff that anger, vent it at someone who is not the person I'm angry at, get talked down and say, okay, so what are you really upset about here? What's maybe your part in this first? If nothing else, there's no boundary here? Why are you letting this person do this over and over again? Or, well, maybe they're just right about what they're saying and you don't like that. Right. It makes you real angry.
You ever think like, or maybe you're just an asshole. I'm not calling you one. I'm calling myself one. Like
Sometimes
most of the time, there's
Sometimes
nothing at the base of it besides me being a jerk.
Sometimes what made me angry is they're right. And I don't want to admit it. And so I raged at them. And so by the time I was a nutty alcoholic, I had sort of really worked that out a lot and sort of recovered from that sort of anger expression thing.
That's big.
Yeah, but I was doing damage in other ways, believe me.
Right. Do tell. You mentioned your spiritual life. Did your spiritual life help get you sober, or once you got sober, you got a spiritual life?
Complicated question. Both. I always say both. I find that most people who go into recovery, you have to sort of make some peace with higher power because you deal with it a lot. And a lot of people are like, I don't know, this whole God thing, I don't know. Or I'm a little bit traumatized by the religion I was raised in. Or I don't believe in it at all. I'm at best agnostic. Or, I do really believe. I have my version of faith. But when you get into it, for as long as I have, Kat, both from my experience as a sponsee and then sponsoring other people, there's sort of two things about it. There's one, whatever your faith is, whatever you believe in, there's usually an element of it where you kind of believe there's a punishing element to it. There's a God that's going to kind of get you if you don't behave.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, and which you may believe that's true, but it sort of blocks forgiving yourself and others and really kind of working with, well, how can I improve from here? It's sort of like, it's very black and white. The other thing is that people that really came out of the adult children program, and I found was true of me and a lot of my sponsees, is actually a lot of what goes on is our image of our higher power or God, whatever it is, how they really are, how the higher power really is pretty much how your parents treated you growing up. Like that's what I took in as what God is.
Wow.
Yeah. So
that's giving them a lot of power.
Well, when you're 7 and when you're 5 and you're 10, they are higher power.
That's right.
So whether you are looking at it that way or not. So there's usually some sort of reconfiguring of maybe higher power isn't my mom and dad or how they handled things. Maybe it's whatever my own connection to all this is. It's
interesting.
Yeah.
Yes. You mentioned being a workaholic. You've been a professional for a long time. Thank God you've had a healthy, long-standing career. How did fame play into your addictions?
Fame, like almost anything else I encountered in my life, became a drug on its own. Became a thing to be addicted to. And fame and the pursuit of fame. Fame and the pursuit of success. It's sort of the Hollywood version of workaholism. If you're fortunate enough to get some traction, involves fame. And it's almost like a scorecard, like who's the most famous in the room, who's the highest box office, whose show's number one, who's got a hit, who doesn't, what role are you on, how much do you make? It's a huge scoreboard, and very egoic. Your ego gets really wrapped up into the point where you think that is you, that you don't even separate you from that, like you're...
And for an addict, that sounds like a dangerous place to be.
Oh, absolutely. Look, people are going to... so there's not only the work itself, which is very addictive, and it's, again, 12, 14 hours a day. Your body, mind, and soul goes into creating a role. You're not at a desk, crunching numbers. It's like your whole being is... And then eventually it's you up there. It's your performance. It's some version of you that is... Critics are either liking or not. Audiences are either liking or not. Studios are either paying or not. So... it's hard to separate sometimes that. But that fame thing, it's a very fickle higher power. Let's put it that way. Okay.
Yes.
So I like to refer to that as as that version of Hollywood as my drunken uncle. Okay. That one is wasted. One day will kiss you on the mouth inappropriately. The next day will punch you in the face. The next day will ignore you. And you have no idea who you're going to get.
That's very well put. Yeah.
And if you live and die by what that crazy drunken nut is valuing in that moment or doing to you or not doing to you, it's going to be a really rough ride. And I've seen it played into my own addictions. I've seen it play into a lot of other folks. And fame is a drug like anything else that you can overdo or get attached to, because it's outside validation. It's coming from outside you, like a drug. Yes, if I do this bump of cocaine, I'm going to feel quite good for about 10 minutes. If I have a hit movie and everybody loves me, that's a little bit of a longer high, but not that much.
Like 20 minutes.
A few months maybe.
Right.
You can ride that high of your career. Genius movie star, genius artists ride it for years and years, but go look at any biography like on A&E of any legend from now or the past. Their career is a roller coaster. Up, it's down, it's up, it's down, it's up, it's down.
If you had had the opportunity to be a successful actor, a successful artist without the fame component, would you have taken that deal?
Now, yes. I even joke about it. I mean, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I really believe this because of my Simpsons job.
Okay, strap yourself in. The way it goes down is...
But pause! The knowledge you offer would spoil the movie event of the year! Nay, century! Nay, epoch! Nay, summer!
It's a cartoon that's 36 years.
Heard of it.
And tremendously well paid. And for now, I am known for it, but that took like over a decade before I knew I was even really associated with it or put the face to the show. And I'm grateful now that I have I consider a day job that I love, that is a fairly humble job that I kind of do not in front of anybody in a microphone, and I get a lot of joy out of it, and it pays me so well, and I don't have to be front and center. I mean, that said, I still love acting and love being on camera and being on stage, and when the right things come along, I love to do it. But I'm much more into these days doing that in service of a cause I love or a project I truly love or with people I really love. And I'm very fortunate that I can quite literally afford to do that. And I'd rather not chase that dragon of, well, this is going to be huge, and because I have lived long enough to see that there on the other side of that is a kind of a big so what. It's like, what does that do for my family or the people I love, or it actually endangers my sobriety. What have I really contributed except a trophy on my shelf, really?
I mean, what does any job really contribute except that you're doing something that you're gifted with? I assume the millions of people who consume the work you've put out have felt things, have realized things, have just enjoyed. So there's value.
There is, but that stuff still happens. It's the difference between, and again, it's a ridiculous luxury to be in a monetary position because of a cartoon show, let's just say it, that I can sit here and say this. I don't have to, because choosing jobs for monetary reasons is a very real thing. I mean, of course, one must do that.
I would say most people have that situation.
Actors who are lucky enough to get those jobs consider themselves fortunate, and I'm on board with that. But what I'm talking about more is the obsession I've seen a lot of actors go through who've had some success. If it's not just I need a job that's going to keep the lights on and feed my family, it's like, I got to get back on top. I got to get that thing that's going to put me in, the top 10 and do the thing. And okay, it's, sure. But I've seen that lead to a lot of obsession and misery, and what are you really chasing? Like, how important is it?
At the end of the day, it's just for you.
kinda. Is it really that important that you be the guy who delivers? I mean, maybe if you have a burning passion to tell a story, and then by all means.
I hear you.
And there's nothing wrong with wanting to remain on top, but I've seen it lead to a lot of suffering, actually.
Sure, because it's very, very hard to get on top and remain on top.
Yeah.
So to keep, like you say, chasing that dragon does sound like a lot of pain. When you got sober, you were already well underway in your career. Were you afraid you were going to lose some of your advantage, some of your artistic edge?
Yeah, it's a common thing. Like, am I not going to be funny anymore? Am I not going to be creative anymore? But by the time I was in codependency recovery, the time I was in alcohol recovery, maybe my bottoms weren't that horrific, but they were bad enough that I wasn't too concerned with that. I was much more humbled. I was like, please let me just feel all right again.
On the scale of 1 to all right, how you feeling now?
Oh, highly all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say I hover around an 8 or 9. And it's a one day, not every day, it's a one day at a time thing, but I'm very grateful to the support systems that I've pursued and created in my life. And I lean on them and they lean on me. And I would say this, that high I was chasing either through a bottle, drugs, through fame, through work, through food, through sex and love, and some other things too. What I really was chasing was actual connection with other people, like genuine, compassionate, heartfelt connection, which ironically, what was my greatest shame, which was being an alcoholic and a drug addict and a codependent and a food addict and an anorexic and all these, and a workaholic and all these things at first you don't want to share with anybody, actually connecting over the honesty of those things with other people actually creates that high that I always wanted, which is, part of the work we do is you're honest with God, yourself, and another human being about what's really going on.
It's really amazing the power of saying something out loud, because I am a deep believer in God, always have been. But I kind of feel like if I'm trying to get away with some shit, like, well, God's not talking out loud here, so I can probably get away with it. But if I were to say that stuff out loud to you, Hank, I would feel instantly accountable and exposed, and sometimes that is what it takes.
Matthew Perry, God's a bunch of drunks in a room together. I don't have any kind of direct pipeline to whatever is up there around us. I do have a lot of people I trust I can talk to now, and we sort of get there by being really honest with each other.
Speaking of that, does your dear friend Matthew ever come to you?
No, no, not in that spiritual way you're saying. I carry him with me, especially his sense of humor. And, we had a way of joking that I'll still do, and I just did it last night with a mutual friend who knew him really well. Matthew had this kind of deep, rattled, sarcastic voice he used to do that we still, and I feel he kind of lives that way in me. We were so young, we were together, we sort of helped develop each other's comedic styles. So that really lives.
Those are really important friendships.
Yeah, and the memories of just especially how funny he was. And he was I really do owe him my sobriety. He was there that night. He brought me in, and my whole first year of not drinking, which was very difficult, it was a good year for him. He was sober that year. He had pockets of real recovery on and off in his life. And I had the really good fortune of having him as a good friend and sobriety partner with that year. And it really got me through. He was so funny. Oh, my God.
Right. By the way, it's the funny that keeps you. The people in my early sobriety that made me laugh and kept me coming back and thinking, well, I guess it is sober, not somber. I guess there is life. I thought sober people, the world's most boring, that I was instantly going to get dowdy and old fast and be boring, which I guess was always my biggest fear. I didn't want to be boring.
Yeah.
And you know what's fucked up? I didn't want to be boring to others. I didn't want other people to find me boring.
I totally get it. I mean, a couple of things about that I found. So I started looking at it as like, it's not so much the boring vanilla guy that's sitting here right now. It's the horrifying...
The raging maniac who's not out there.
What do they call it? The flaming hot dude that would have been causing a lot of problems for himself and everybody else.
I feel like what I have saved myself by being sober is the degradation.
Yeah.
And if I could share that, if I could help other people not live in their own worlds of degradation, that would be a day well spent for me. And I think I've been able to spare a lot of others. Like you said, God forbid, behind the wheel of a car. My worst...
Yeah, it's looking at a glass half empty. It's like, it's not so much what you ain't doing.
Right.
No,
it is what you ain't doing.
It's not so much
It's
the fun stuff you ain't
right.
doing. It's the bad horrible stuff that you're not doing.
Right.
That's like good enough for now. But it's a fair enough feeling, because we call it a hallway moment. Because a lot of my goodwill towards man was sort of in a bottle, was sort of around at a bar and with folks, and it's how I connected. So without that, it took a long time to replace it with, well, I don't have anything to replace it with yet.
Except yourself.
Yeah, it took years to find the kind of connection that I was seeking there.
Well, I didn't know you before, but I think you have found it. You are an incredibly enjoyable guest.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for
Glad you're at my
watching.
birthday.
Me too. Did you get my present?
I don't know that I did.
It was a Chili's gift card.
I must have. So thank you.
You're so welcome.
You want your baby back, baby back, baby back. Okay.